a special meeting to have the opportunity to go over our asset management program plan and analysis or evaluation or assessment of our sewer system in Woodstock, which consists of a collection system and a pumping station. And I'm going to turn this over right now to our engineering firm who contracted with the ARPA funds that we've received. WPCA Engineering, Dave Prickett and Justin Scott.
Yep, Dave and Justin. We prepared a presentation this evening as we've done in the past. We try to intend for these things to be pretty casual, so if you do have questions pertaining to the slide as we're going and you want to interject, feel free. We can certainly circle back and go through anything you have. There are copies of the slides that are up here. I do believe there's 2 or 3 extras. If anybody wants a copy, you're welcome to grab one. We can provide Leanne with a copy of a PDF of the slides if you don't already have those. We'll send them to you in case you want to post them or whatever. With that, I think we'll jump in and just kind of give you the overview of the project. Justin and I'll kind of go back and forth on these and take it from there.
Yeah. So tonight we're hoping to go through, again, kind of a recap of the project. As Dave said, we've been here once before to go over kind of the initial findings. We went back, we did some additional work under an amendment to locate some structures and pipes that we weren't able to as part of the first phase. So we're going to go through all, just a recap, bring everybody up to speed. Those of you who haven't heard about the project at all, from the ground up, we'll work through that pretty quickly. Then we'll get into some of the updated findings and recommendations, building off of what we found, the first time through. We'll get into and probably spend the most of the time on the financial evaluation, looking at the recommendations, the capital improvements plan that we're recommending and how that might impact, the WPCA and their budgeting processes moving forward. And then we'll talk a little bit about, what are the next steps beyond this project and potential things the WPCA could consider to implement moving forward. And then again, like Dave said, discussion and questions. We don't have to hold it to the end if the board, wants to dive off into anything as we're going through here. Just speak up or raise your hand. We'll certainly do that. So for a quick recap on the project. So again, this all started, as an asset management, capital improvements plan, and CMOM project. So essentially there's several drivers as to why you would want to undertake this. One of them being that the WPCA had some ARPA funds, which they, used very efficiently in taking on this project. And starting to really drill down into the collection system, the assets you own, the conditions, and what might be needed over the next 5, 10, 20-year planning window. So there's regulatory drivers for this. CMOM requirements are showing up in NIPD's permits, which you are a co-permittee of your downstream community, Putnam, where flows from Woodstock go.
Justin,
yeah.
Can you just define acronyms as you go for the people that aren't familiar with what these things stand for?
Yeah, sorry. So NIPD's, that's the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That's essentially the permitting requirements of wastewater treatment facilities. So every surface water, wastewater treatment facility that discharges to surface water has one of these NIPD's permits, with limitations as to what they can discharge to the surface waters, essentially. Woodstock isn't a permit holder because you don't own a wastewater treatment facility, but because you contribute wastewater to Putnam, you have an intermunicipal agreement with Putnam to treat and dispose of your flows. So you are a co-permittee of that community's permit. Proactive versus reactive, again, that was the whole goal of the WPCA getting into this. Hey, let's look at our system. Woodstock, again, not having your own treatment facility, but sending flows through an IMA. Every gallon of flow that goes to Putnam, there's a direct dollar cost of that. So if you could look at your system and understand where there might be some low-hanging fruit to eliminate extraneous flows, being rainwater, groundwater, things that shouldn't be in the sewer system that you're needlessly sending to be treated and paying for. If you could find opportunities to eliminate that, there could be a direct payback and impact to the WPCA's budget there.
That one other acronym that we mentioned, CMOM, literally the letter C, MOM, so it's capacity management, operation and maintenance, and it's all directly related to the sewer system. So in the wastewater permit that Putnam has, there's language in there about collection system activities to help. They're essentially to do 2 things: to help reduce the potential for overflows to the environment, which obviously nobody wants, There was some experience, a decade ago with the pump station and, all that stuff relative to, Woodstock getting involved. And then there's also the emphasis that it puts on improving the kind of the quality and of the waste stream, the peak flows, et cetera, that are going to Putnam, and the the plant performance meeting the permit. So those are the elements that are in there. What we're seeing now in Connecticut, now that the state's gotten through the massive projects in the cities, is they're going out to the medium-sized communities and smaller communities, and they're enforcing the CMOM requirements in the permit. And for those communities that don't have a plan or haven't done anything with it, they're then getting administrative orders relative to do those requirements. And those are often coming directly from EPA. Of course, they let Connecticut be the muscle to facilitate it, but EPA is driving the bus on that one.
And then, the industry standard of care and level of service, again, that's just, reinforcing the WPCA. Obviously, you have customers, you serve them, they pay sewer rates, which are your revenues. So maintaining that level of service that your customers expect, that was obviously a focus of the project as well. And then the cost benefit, which again relates directly to II, and what can you guys do to remove potential sources of II, which might have a direct payback.
Which are infiltration and inflow.
There you go. Too many acronyms. Yeah. Infiltration and inflow. Again, when you would be
You pay
groundwater.
by the gallon.
Yep.
So they don't really care whether it's water or wastewater. You're paying for every gallon that goes there.
So again, just in general, what is asset management? It's a buzzword in the industry. It's becoming more prevalent in the buried infrastructure world. Essentially, these utilities were put in 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They were out of sight, out of mind. Not many communities, kept records of these things or really dealt with them until they broke and things were emergency failures, right? So asset management is intended to be more proactive. So you want to have a planning roadmap. What are you going to need, not just today to maintain your utility, but what is it going to take over the next 5, 10, 20-year window in terms of the capital, the O&M, the staffing, what do you need to really run this utility? There's obviously a goal to prolong your existing asset life. Woodstock owns a lot of pipe, a lot of manholes, a pump station, as you said. These things have value to them, inherent value. You paid to put those in, they have some worth to them. You want to, just like you have a car, you bring it in for an oil change, every 3,000 miles. You want to make sure that you maintain the systems you do have adequately so that life, extends. You want to make cost-effective decisions. Again, not being so reactive. Something broke, we need to fix it. Where do we get the money for that? This is intended to step back and say, okay, in this planning window, what do we have to do? And that not only allows those, good decisions, but you get to plan in terms of sewer rates and, having an adequate reserve fund to plan for those expenditures. Again, kind of the same thing for long-term financial stability, rolls into the rates, the revenues, the financial health of the utility. It allows you to allocate your time and resources effectively, and then, providing that sustainable level of service to customers. And really the last one is the most important, that, walking away today with this report that you have, that isn't not intended to just, go on a shelf and be the end of it. So asset management is a constantly living, evolving document. As you make fixes, you repair things change in your systems. You should go back to that plan and update that and have, like a constantly evolving plan as you move forward into that planning window. So again, those are just basics of asset management for those who haven't really heard much about it. That's one of the keys of this project. What it entailed and what it typically entails for asset management is an inventory of your assets. So through GIS mapping, we have a database of every pipe, every manhole, everything within your wastewater system, low pressure pipe, etc. We have unique IDs associated with each of those assets. So we start out with an inventory. We have a list of everything we know that Woodstock has buried in the ground or above grade, in terms of the pump station. Step 2 would be to actually go out and evaluate the condition and the performance of every asset. So we did that. We put cameras in every pipe that we could. We looked in every manhole that we could, did a 3D, scan of those manholes to evaluate their conditions. And then we did a full walkthrough and visual assessment of the pump station. That was step number 2. Number 3 was looking at the sustainable level of service. So understanding how the utility should be operating and how those assets should be functioning versus the condition that we observed. That led into number 4, which is kind of the delta between those. You know, what did we see as deficiencies or things that should be considered for capital improvements, meaning where should money be spent to rehab or replace certain assets, or simply perform increased O&M for some of them. And then an implementation plan, which again, we'll get into in terms of some financial scenarios that could be considered by the WPCA of how you can actually move some of this forward into the future and address those capital needs. So that's essentially the stepwise process that we took, you know, through this project, which culminated in that report and the recommendations. So this was our actual.
Jump in?
Yeah, you can take this.
All right, I'll give you a break.
Yeah.
So as part of the process, and maybe go to the next slide here, just we'll reverse these two, just so the folks in the audience can see what you have. So in lay terms, you have a pretty big sewer system for the number of customers, right? You've got a lot of real estate in between properties. The properties here are pretty big. These are not city blocks with houses stacked next to each other. It's a little different in Woodstock. So you have a large asset relative to the number of customers. About 31,000 feet of gravity sewer, which includes 160 manholes. The manholes are important, and we'll come back to those because those are the points of access for operation and maintenance, for checking on your system, etc. You've got about a half mile of low pressure sewer, and basically that's just a pressure pipe with grinder pumps connected to it. I don't know if anybody here's got a grinder pump, but if you're in a location where you can't get your wastewater out of the house by gravity, you might have a little grinder pump in your yard or your basement that ejects the wastewater up to the higher elevation in the street. You have one pump station, that's the good news. So despite having a lot of pipe, you don't have to go up and down hills a bunch of times, which pump stations are very expensive over time. They're mechanical and electrical systems. You have one. We'll come back to it. You guys do an amazing job with your pump station. It's like a Navy battleship. You take a lot of pride in it. I know you all do. And that was showing. And with that one pump station, you have just under 3,000 feet of force main. So that's the pipe by which the pumps convey the wastewater downstream by pressure further downstream to the next high point. So that's just kind of the lay of the land relative to the sewer system. We can come back to this map later if you have any specific questions on that.
Yeah, and I think one of the questions, Leanne, you might have forwarded us is just in general how the system flows. So everything to the north, you know, flows down to your Fairgrounds pump station, this red square here. There's a small private pump station on the Fairgrounds site that is not town-owned, but everything essentially in the northern end of the system flows into this pump station, and this is the force main in orange that Dave was talking about. And then the remainder of the system flows by gravity, you know, down to your meter manhole and then down to the Peak Brook pump station that Putnam owns. So that's just kind of a delineation between kind of the upper half of the system into the pump station and then down to the, you know, southern half of your system where it then flows to Putnam. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I just reversed the slides here. I think I put them in backwards.
There you go.
So in terms of what we did for actual evaluation as part of this project, you had a map when we started. It was a decent map that was put together over the years, but I think we were all surprised as we got in there, like how many different pipe types and minor, you know, configurations of flow path we figured out. So coming out of this project, you have what I would describe as a pretty detailed, fantastic, you know, steady state map of where all the manholes are, what types of pipes go between all the manholes, what diameter they are. So that's going to be a really good planning tool for you moving forward. As Justin mentioned, we did internal camera inspections of all the sewer mains. Not for the faint of heart, I guess, since we're TVing the inside of pipes. And then for manholes, we have like a 3D robot that goes down and scans the image, and it's pretty cool. It kind of turns it into a flat image of the whole structure, and you can see things from that image that you can't see unless somebody was holding you by the ankles down in the manhole looking inside. So it is a good tool. I mentioned the pump station condition assessment, and that was an area of really good strength for WPCA and for the town. We then took all of that information, as I said, updated the map accordingly, and put together an asset management database. Essentially, the asset management database is a spreadsheet, right, of all the assets. We broke them up into pipe and manholes. just because it makes it easy to facilitate kind of, they're different entities, right? One's a pipe, one's a vertical structure, horizontal, vertical. Based on that asset management database, and we went through this a little bit at the previous meeting, we scored your assets, right? So there's two kinds of scoring that were done as part of this project. One, I would call it like a raw score. So categories of evaluation were identified for each of the assets. They were scored 1 through 5 in each category, and then weighting was applied to those assets to help weight them. It's a very subjective process, no doubt. If, what do we have, 10, 12 people here tonight? If we all did it in complete separation, we'd all come back with 12 different kind of approaches in terms of what we'd like. I think you'd see some common themes, but it is a subjective planning tool. Based on that, we then put together a capital improvements plan that was ranked, and basically we're able to categorize our recommendations one of 3 ways. And we always try to put it together one of 3 ways based on who's gonna fix the problems, right? So the first category is O&M, operation and maintenance. That's gonna be things like surcharged manholes, partially blocked pipes, roots, things like that, that an operations staff in a larger community like Putnam would be dealing with. Second category would be rehabilitation. So some of your pipes and manholes that are in good shape are just starting to show the wear. So it would be like, you know, the seal coating on a driveway, you know, painting the exterior house, things that prolong the life of the asset. So rehabilitation would be trenchless construction. So that's a different category of contractors in that case that do that work. And then the third type would be replacement. Now your system in general is pretty young by sewer standards in New England, right? Your asset's not that old. Most of your pipes PVC. But with that said, there were some areas, particularly related to manholes that had been buried and such over time that needed to be excavated, saw cut with the pavement, brought up to grade. So we consider that not like a rehabilitation, more of like a open cut construction methods. We put that in kind of the replacement category. There were a few sections of pipe that we'll get to in a second that tend to be kind of deteriorating at a faster rate than others. And then lastly, we put together sewer rate projections as part of our recommendations. There are recommendations, you know, as your consultant at the end of the day, you're the WPCA that sets the rates for your customers. But we have to give you some baseline usually, and we'll get to this, usually our recommendations tend to be on the more aggressive side. So we talk about the box, the range of options that you have. We'll come back to that in a second. So just in terms of kind of what we saw for common themes in your sewer system, these are pictures of manholes. In the center of the slide, you can see that there's a manhole cover that's been paved over. Again, not disparaging anybody or a small community. You roll your sleeves up more than any WPCA that we work with in terms of taking on actual physical responsibilities. But with that said, you're a small utility that doesn't really have, you know, a full-time operation component. And because of that, I suspect that there's been times in the past where roads were getting paved where, you know, you just didn't have the ability to ensure that those structures weren't paved over. And we see it all the time. If the state comes, especially on the state roads, they don't want to adjust any structures. They just go right through it. And next thing you know, you got 8 inches of blacktop on top of your manhole. So that was a common theme. Leanne and your team has worked hard to get contractors out there to restore access, but that's something that you'll want to watch out for moving forward. The other area where we saw some deficiencies was at manhole walls. While you do have a lot of precast concrete, modern manholes, there are joints in the manholes, and those joints are the first to deteriorate. You know, there's like a bituminous seal in that joint, but over time that does degrade. And you can see in that photo on the top right and the top left, water starts to come through those. That's the II that John mentioned early on, the infiltration inflow. So any of that rainwater and groundwater that's getting into the pipes, you're paying for every gallon of that. So, you know, we took note of those, and we'll come back to manholes because the good news is rebuilding manholes is relatively cost effective as wastewater construction goes. And then the last thing is the riser. So you've all been out for a walk or on the road and you drive over the metal frame and cover. Just below that metal frame and cover, there's usually 1 to 3, sometimes more levels of bricks that they use to level that up to the grade of the pavement. Well, you know, you're up here pretty good in elevation, you get good freeze thaws here in the winter, maybe last year for the first time in a few years, but, every time we get that freeze thaw, bricks are not flexible, mortar is not flexible. So when that happens, you lose that integrity, and water finds the path of least resistance in it. You get a lot of water, you'd be surprised, that adds up, in the risers. And that was a common theme that was out there, and that too is a relatively inexpensive fix. So that's manholes in a nutshell. In terms of the recommendations, and we kind of gave you the before and after, so when we did the original summary memo, before we had gone out and gone back out to the manholes that were made accessible, we had about, $844,000 worth of recommendations, again, in each of the three categories. And then you can see to the right in the last column, it came down a little bit, because obviously some of those O&M recommendations that were on the list of, providing better access, clearing brush and things like that from manholes that might have been in wooded easements, had been addressed, which is good. So, that's kind of where you're sitting. It doesn't really change, the overall grand scheme of things. The replacement went down because you provided access to the manholes that were paved over and buried. But we obviously found more defects in terms of rehabilitation by putting eyes on those pipes. No surprise. In terms of the internal TV inspections, these are all images from your system. I would say obviously your PVC pipe is very new in the grand scheme of things, and your PVC pipe is in pretty good shape structurally. You had a lot of O&M needs on your PVC pipe, a lot of places where debris, paper dams, some root intrusion, manholes or pipe penetrations to manholes allows things to build up over time. It was clear that you haven't yet had the ability to have like a proactive recurring cleaning program, and that's something that's in the recommendations, is to have an annual cycle of getting out there and proactively flushing these mains on a routine basis. The pipes that we did see trouble on is you have a small percentage of your system that has clay pipes, obviously, closer to the campuses and such, and obviously those have joints every 2 or 3 feet. It's pottery. It's like those orange, you can still buy them at Home Depot, to put plants in, and every 2 or 3 feet in those joints, they used to pack it with oakum, which, basically like a hemp product almost, and over time it's organic, it just deteriorates, it's gone. So the roots start coming through those joints, as you see in the lower left and the lower right. And then in the upper left, you can see once those joints are deteriorated, if you're at an area where groundwater is high, I'm sure some of you have places on your property or your neighbor's property where you have high groundwater certain times of the year. It will find that sewer. That sewer is a French drain for your town. And it does its job, unfortunately, right? So the water will get in there. We don't want it going into the sewer, but it will get in there in the weak spots. It always finds it. And then something that was surprising to me as we got in here is your cast iron, ductile iron segments. So your metal pipes that were traditionally used maybe at like a stream crossing or in a highway area where the state might have required it. I suspect you have some pretty corrosive soils out here, in terms of the water probably being very acidic. I've seen this in a few areas in New England, but I'd say you have like an accelerated decline of your metal pipes, and you can see it at the joints, and again, that's the first place to go. You can see that kind of, mineral deposits is the term that we use, but it's the brown staining. The water gets in, and as soon as it does, it oxidizes and the metals come out. If you have like a little creek near your house or like water coming out of the ground or something, you'll see the same thing happen there, the red iron mineral deposits coming out. So those were the themes, and then top right, you can just see, maintenance things like the bricks. Remember I talked about those bricks under the manholes every year when the freeze thaw and the 18-wheelers are rolling over them? They fall out and they end up in your pipes, so if you don't have a routine cleaning program, eventually that brick will become a little dam there, and things will pile up behind it, and we don't want them backing up in anybody's houses. So kind of a quick synopsis in terms of what we saw on pipes on the money side. Pretty darn close in terms of kind of where things settled out before and after. I think most of the amendment work that we did was related to the manholes that were buried. Most of the pipes that we TV'd, I think were up by the school in the amendment, and that was relatively new pipe. So, that's just kind of where things are sitting, about $2 million. So we put them together, you know, you have recommendations in here, just shy of $3 million. It's a big number for a small community with, you know, a small number of customers, no doubt, but it's our job to bring the real bad news and for you to, you know, process and synthesize what can work locally, for Woodstock. So we'll get into now the kind of financial evaluation, and I'll start here.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is, again, a fairly subjective process, right? Budgeting. And it sounds like you've had a little bit of that this spring with town meetings and stuff. Everybody can sometimes has a different vision of how they want to handle things. But we have some assumptions that we put into our recommendation, the financial model. The first of which is, and again, this is not intended to be disrespectful to the WPCA in any way, but you know, your budget's roughly $300,000, right? You know, 90% of that is what you pay Putnam. So while $300,000 a year is a lot of money, up until FY26, based on what Leanne sent us last week, you know, 90% of your budget, you're only spending about 30 grand on your system per year. So being at the end of the pipe stinks, because the further you are from the treatment plant, and when you don't have your own treatment plant, your costs are higher. We have a lot of clients like you that are at the end of the pipe, that are regional communities that discharge downstream, that don't have a lot of customers, and that's a recipe for disaster for sewer costs, right? It's numerator divided by denominator, and when your denominator isn't growing or is small, somebody from the audience mentioned something, costs going up, that numerator is going up every year, you know, whether you want it to or not. A lot of things that you can't control. So we believe that, you know, you need to add a sizable amount to your annual budget to allow you to tackle these proactive routine programs. So you've got, I think it was like 300,000 of O&M recommendations that we recommended. That's catch-up work. But beyond that, what we'd like to see you get in is to budget more annually to get into a recurring preventative maintenance cycle. You may have to outsource some of the O&M. You may have to get some equipment. You know, you may look at hiring a wastewater operator part-time. Those are all options that you can do. You're all creative, and how you get 30 grand to stretch to your pipes and your pump station is, you're doing incredible work for your customers, but it's not sustainable long-term either. And I suspect that, you know, as you move on from your endeavors and the younger generation, myself and younger, move in, the will to be as involved as you are might start to decrease. Again, just opinion. So how did we get that number? We looked at several other communities that we work with, and we took a look at their budgets, and they ranged from folks that aren't proactive to folks that are very proactive. We excluded the cost that they pay their downstream community, and then we basically just took their remaining budget divided by the footage of pipe and tried to come up with what is the dollars per foot that other regional communities are spending on their sewer system in a given year. And it ranged quite a bit. We had one other client that was close to you guys, and then we had one that was spending 10 times as much per year. So that's where we landed. We assumed moving forward in your budget that Putnam and local O&M costs would increase at 3% per year. It could be 0, it could be 1, it could be 2, it could be 5. I think 3 is a reasonable inflation number moving forward. That will not be the straw that breaks the camel's back, as you'll see in a second. On the O&M side, you know, what our thought is maybe try to catch up on that list that we've given you over the next 3, 4, 5 years. You may be able to do it more cost efficiently than we've estimated, given your track record, and that's great if you don't have to spend that money. But we think that there are things that you should deal with pretty soon, right? You know, bricks that are in pipes and, you know, roots that are starting to come in. You don't want to let that stuff go. If you let it go, it's gonna, you know, result in just this few months ago, obviously a much bigger, you know, pipe and project, but East Windsor, Connecticut, had a 36-inch pipe break down by the Connecticut River. It was $1.2 million repair. So, you know, not an 8-inch pipe in a roll apart, but you could easily spend $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 on an emergency repair with bypass pumping, and it can get out of control pretty fast. The contractors aren't coming in for free. On the rehabilitation side, you know, we think you have a little bit more time with that, and we said we'd start at about even increments of $115,000 annually starting in FY31. And on replacement, again, you have some time to defer that should you choose, and we just took like a linear percentage, right? We took the timing over a number of years. Leanne, you asked the other day in an email if there's a way to kind of compare O&M to rehab to replacement in terms of prioritization. The O&M ones in our eyes aren't optional, you need to do them, right? You can choose the timeline or the period over which you want to do them, 6 months, 5 years, that's your choice. Rehabilitation, in my opinion, extends the life of your asset, so I would strongly encourage you to do those, especially the ones that have relatively low cost, like, you know, $1,500 to seal a riser on a manhole that might get X number of gallons out. You might make that money back, like in a year or two from what you're spending in Putnam. The replacement ones are obviously, you know, they're more expensive. I would say on replacement, make sure every manhole's accessible every year. Go out, open every manhole, and make sure you can get into them. That would be the minimum.
Just that made me think of, what do you think of those, plastic inserts for manholes?
Don't put them in. Don't put them in.
What's the pro and con?
I don't know, there's no pros in my eyes. And when they do get put in, the operators go out and take a drill and they drill a hole in it and drain it into the manhole so that they can lift it off. It's, they never sit right. Half the time they end up cracking and they're down in the invert of the manhole. My opinion, and the salespeople would probably tell you they're amazing, but I wouldn't put them in. I looked at them 15, 20 years ago and tried them one time, and, you know, it was a nightmare for that one client, so I'll never again.
Thank you.
So I think we go on to the uglies. Yep. You wanna go to that side of the table now?
Oh, yeah. I wanna be where
All
I
right.
can kick you.
I'm a big guy, kick hard. So these are your budgets for FY 24, 25, and 26. So this is today and looking back the last 3. The thing that jumps out here, and your budget did go up for FY 26 as proposed. It does look like you're starting to allocate more costs directly to your system, which is a good trend for sure. What I don't like on the bottom on the revenue side is as your budget's increased, you know, you've held your sewer rates. And I get that, like, you hear it at like the grocery store or at church or town hall or whatever, like sewer rates are high, everything's going up. But as a WPCA, your job is to set your budget, and moving forward, when you set your annual expenses budget, you have to set your annual revenues budget. They have to match and zero out. And when they don't, like right now, it just means you're taking money out of retained earnings, your reserve. So, you know, you're gonna bring in the same revenue if everybody pays their bills in FY 26, right? That you did in FY 25, but your budget's 30 grand more. So in theory, your reserve account's gonna go from 600,000 to 570,000. Now, $600,000 reserve is an awesome reserve for a utility this size. The golden rule is 1 year's budget in reserve, a minimum. I like to qualify that by saying 1 year's budget in reserve or the amount of an anticipated emergency repair, whichever is greater, right? So you're a little utility. So if you only had $300,000 in the piggy bank and something bad happened, that money's gone in a hurry, you know? So if you can keep that reserve at 600,000, do it. You know, if over time, even it gets a little bit, creeps up a little bit at 3% a year to match your overall budget increases, do it. You're doing a really good job with the reserve. But don't let the burden of, you know, we don't wanna raise our rates, you know, if you don't wanna raise your rates, don't raise your expense budget. But if you raised your expense budget, you really have to raise your rates. So that's today looking back. Anybody on that one?
Yeah, stick here.
Okay.
Any questions on this one?
It's about $90 a month per customer, per EDU, I should say, equivalent dwelling unit, so the equivalent of like a single family home for your system. It's not insignificant, but, you know, $90 a month, that's about where you are right now. This is the budget looking forward, nobody can read this, but it has all the assumptions that I read in on a couple of slides ago, where I said the timeline and stuff, so just jump right over to the bar chart. So, this is your budget, your annual expenses budget, from left to right, starting in FY '24 and going all the way out for FY '36. I would never do a sewer rate study where I tell somebody to set their rates for 12 years, that's crazy. But I think in this case, where you're taking like your first kind of static look at it with a capital plan, I wanted to give you the binoculars to look out to see what the top of the box might be, so to speak. And the orange going across from left to right, that's what you pay Putnam. The green is what you spend on your own system. So, you know, again, like, $300,000 a lot of money per year, no doubt, for a budget. But most of that is what you pay Putnam just for the right to treat and dispose of your wastewater. You know, the fact that you guys have been running a utility for $30,000 a year is pretty miraculous, but in my opinion, not sustainable. So as we move to the right, you'll see that that extra $40,000 that we suggested goes in there. We didn't escalate that out of 3%. We just kept that at $40,000 moving to the right. That's the green. I'm sorry, that's the blue. The blue is where the extra 40,000 starts, and you can see it's the same width blue from left to right. The yellow, and this is where things, again, become subjective based on what you want to do as WPCA members and commissioners, is the capital plan. So that's the impact. We didn't finance anything. My feeling in working with you a little bit over the years is that you don't have a huge appetite for bonding things, that you'd rather chip away at them. I could be dead wrong. You could do one project and bond the whole thing and be done with it, or you could chip away at it a little bit each year and just using cash. Your choice. Neither is wrong. And I don't know that either one over the course of 12 to 15 years is really gonna change the magnitude of where things are headed, right? You're just not paying for interest. So you increase a little bit quicker because you're not financing debt than you would if you'd have a bigger step if you took debt on all at once, but then it would flatten out. So you can see your budgets, you know, going from 270,000 up to 570, 580,000. Like it's a big. If you were to do this, that's what it would look like. The next one. All right. So here's on the revenue side. So if you did spend that money on the expenses side, what does it look like on the revenue side? So the three blue bars are 24, 25, and 26, $1,079 per year per EDU, per equivalent dwelling unit. And then from 27 forward, you can see what those annual costs do. You'd have a sizable jump in 27 if you were to take this on. And over the course of a period of time, your annual costs would more than double if you were to do that. And then the last kind of bar chart here is the monthly stuff. Usually when we sit down with communities, it's like cell phone, cable, internet, all those different bills, electric, gas. You roll things down into what the monthly cost would be. The left vertical axis is the total monthly cost. The numbers above each bar are the increase per month from the previous year. So you can see that this plan has a pretty significant jump of $67 a month. That's a lot, no doubt. And then after that, it starts to stabilize a little bit, more in line with what annual, inflation would be relative to those costs. So again, our job is to present the bad news. We present it in a schedule that is often more aggressive than most communities will actually implement. And in the case of Woodstock, my gut feel is that you will be able to implement things more cost effectively with your board creativity than most clients.
Now, I missed something. Why is there such a large jump between 26 and 27?
Here, back 2 slides.
Yeah, that's because that's the first year we're adding in that $40,000 annual O&M.
You're not taking money out of retained earnings anymore, remember? So you already created a $30,000 deficit in 26 by not raising your sewer rates. So your budget went up, what was the percentage the budget went up this year? 11% is proposed. I don't know if that's approved yet, but for FY 26, your expenses budget's going up 11%. You didn't raise your sewer rates.
Okay.
So So if you go back to the last page, you know, they are kind of additive. You're probably looking at, you go forward to that. So right there, one more. Yeah, so you went from 90 to 67, so you're going up by like 40%, which makes sense. You had, you know, a 29% increase in expenses, and then you didn't raise your rate, so you add that 11% back into the mix. So that's if you did nothing for the rest of eternity as WPCA members, just don't hold your rates flat. The message is, you know, costs in life are going up, no doubt, but like, you have to balance your budget. Annual inflation for wastewater utilities over the past like 10 years has averaged somewhere between 4 and 8% per year. There's four main elements to wastewater costs, wastewater O&M costs. There's labor, which is the biggest one. Yours is buried in Putnam, so you don't really see it, but that's the big one. Then there's sludge, so the solids that are taken out of the wastewater that have to be disposed of. That is increasing at probably 15 to 20% per year right now. It's insane, and the reason is, you've all heard about like PFAS and PFOS in the news and everything. Nobody wants the sludge anymore.
Yeah, no
So
place to put it.
they don't want to be in the game because they're handcuffed with the permitting requirements. So now we have to like dewater it to like, you know, 90% and send it on a rail trail to Wyoming or New Mexico. 10 years ago, there were probably 20 players in New England that would take liquid sludge, or, again, not my term, but they call it cake. You know, it basically is dewatered to the point where it's a solid. There were a lot of people that would take that in New England. So transportation costs were low, dewatering costs were low. Now we're down to about 4 players in New England that will take sludge, and the rest of it's basically getting dried and sent out west. And I don't know how long that's gonna last. So there's labor, there's sludge, there's power. Connecticut's got the highest electric costs in the country. That's not gonna change. And then there's all the little things like chemical and stuff, and those are directly proportional to the grocery store, like milk and eggs and everything else. It's oil and transportation driven. So those 4 categories are things you can't control. If you spend no money on capital, your wastewater costs should be going up in that range every year, 4 to 8%. That's a lot. I get it. It's double, triple what you said about the COLA. There's no doubt. I have nothing but bad news when we do these, so I appreciate taking it with a grain of salt, but that's kind of the message. Leanne also asked another good question about funding finance options, and we kind of casually were talking a little bit about this at the beginning of the meeting. You basically have 3, in my opinion. You have the ability to do local financing, local bonding, right? Aside from spending cash, you have 3 ways to finance capital. Local financing, you know, where you'd have a bond locally. Say it's a 20-year note at maybe, 3 to 4%. I don't know what you guys are bonding at, you know, for other projects in town, but that's probably a good ballpark. That's number 1. Number 2 is Connecticut DEEP has the Clean Water Fund. The Clean Water Fund allows 20-year notes at 2% interest. It's increasingly competitive. When I mentioned the 3rd category, and that money usually goes to the larger municipalities. Politics and everything else aside, it's been like that my whole career. So going on 30 years, that's just kind of how it works. Sometimes small communities can get Clean Water Fund money, but a lot of it goes to the bigger municipalities, Hartford, New Haven, Waterbury, etc. The 3rd category is USDA. I know you know about USDA Rural Development because you worked with them, you know, up here with that previous sewer extension. USDA is looking pretty bleak in the coming years. So there had been a good stretch for decades where they could count on, you know, the state of Connecticut getting $10 or $20 million in grant per year for the whole state for rural communities. That's down to peanuts right now, and aside from getting like a 40-year loan, so the only benefit really right now with USDA, unless things change with grants don't look good for the next few years. I don't think anybody is surprised by that. It's going to be a rough time to try to get grants, but leveraging your debt out 40 years sometimes makes sense for like a big treatment plant project that you can't afford the annual payment, but I do not recommend, you know, it's like a mortgage, you look at what you're gonna pay in interest over 40, it's just not worth it, you know? But with that said, it's an option, you could definitely go get loan money from USDA. Those are the three. There's little things that will come up that town hall might make you aware of, like community development block grants, things like that, or, economic development. They're gonna largely be, you know, peanuts relative to your needs financially, and I'm guessing you're gonna be fighting tooth and nail with other town assets and needs, so. Not a great story to tell on that front. Alright, your turn.
Alright, so again, this is just kind of like a recap, the takeaways, you know, observations, things that we've made. Again, better coordination between WPCA and other departments. A lot of that ties back to some of the manholes getting buried, you know, unknowingly, you know, during the course of time here. Annual budget directly related to the Woodstock collection system's inadequate, as Dave kind of discussed, it looks like that's trying to be ramped up by the WPCA, so that's great. But again, you know, we're showing that needed, improved level of O&M moving forward, to be sustainable. Dave also touched on the budgeting process, so again, every year, you know, we pitch this in all of our communities where they don't do it currently. When you go to pass an expenses budget, you know, you need to have a revenues budget that zeroes out. Whether or not that shows some use of retained earnings, that's obviously, you know, an option to level things out, but you should know going into it what you're gonna collect for revenues to see if it's realistic for the expenses you're putting forth and approving. And then that increased level of proactive O&M, you know, as we've talked about, and just budgeting for that. So again, those are just kind of the broader themes, you know, takeaways coming out of this. Again, what are the next steps? So these are our recommendations, as Dave said, as your consultant. The next steps are really for the WPCA to think long and hard and kind of determine, you know, what the next, you know, steps and how you're gonna start to tackle this capital improvements plan. Part of that's gonna be confirming, you know, that level of additional budgeting you wanna try to do, whether it's all at once, you know, ramp it up over several years as you have been doing, or you did most recently. Again, the second one there, confirming the schedule. So we put forth a conceptual schedule. Again, it has that initial, you know, jump from 2026, but then we try to, you know, kind of keep that level, you know, of like 2 to 7% rate increases over time to fund things. There's obviously a whole multitude of options the WPCA could consider for timelines and schedules of how you want to ramp that up. Developing sewer user fee projections. So again, we showed you out to maybe it was 2036. Again, we're not recommending that you today or anytime in the near future set rates, you know, anything further than a year ahead of you. That's just intended to show you kind of the long-term impacts. But again, every year, you know, looking at that budget, you should have a process to kind of analyze what you're going to bring in for revenues. And then maintaining that reserve. You know, we see a lot of communities that start with that, you know, that's super healthy. They just refuse to raise their rates, and over time you're in a tough position when emergencies come up. So you're in a good spot now, and you know, our recommendation would be to try to maintain that level that you're at now, if possible. And then, you know, obviously the big one, implement the recommended plan. That's the whole purpose of, you know, why we're presenting here and putting this forth, and it's up to you guys to take it to the next step, guys and girls. So I think with that, we reached the end, so we'll turn it over to the board and see what other questions you might have.
Folks have any particular questions, other than what we kicked around our notes to WPCA? Yeah, I was looking at your conceptual schedule on, what is page 8, probably slide number 16. And if I understand correctly, you would recommend that we try to tackle the O&M type recommendations for the first few years
Correct.
at a, where you're conceivably saying we could spend $40,000 to $95,000 a year for the next 3 budget years following this upcoming year.
Yeah, we tried to like break that pool of O&M recommendations into dollar values that led to annual budgets just going like this, as opposed to
Right.
yo-yoing around.
Right.
And that's why they range so dramatically between, but generally in the first year, you're doing less, and by year 4, you're doing more.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, if if I was a betting man, I'd say if I think you have $300,000 worth of O and M recommendations, that y'all find a way to do it for half that. You know, based on things that have come up in the past, so.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with that, trust me, I don't care how you get it done,
Right.
as long as you get them done. But that would be like a standard of care thing, like the O and M, you don't wanna let that stuff go.
Well, that's kind of like the questions that we were asking about, how do you prioritize out of the big picture of everything that's coming out here, what things we need to attack first? I think you're saying this. Start with your O and M.
I'd hit the O and M,
rehab,
and then I'd
whatever
look to the
first.
top of the rehab, like, say you guys, like, like for 28, say for FY 28, you're like, we're gonna allocate 15 grand fixing manholes. Just go right to the top of the list, they're ranked from highest points to lowest.
Right.
And just start, you know, we think it's gonna be $3,500 for manhole 7, and you get a quote from somebody to do it for 2,200, awesome.
Right.
Now you can do an extra manhole that year.
Mhm.
But just, you're smart, you know how to do budgeting, you know, y'all have
Right.
a lot of talents, you know, so just use those talents to
Mhm.
come up with creative ways to do it. My message is, your rates are probably gonna double, whether it happens over 12 years or 15 or 18 or something, it's just a reality, that's where it's headed. What you don't wanna do is end up like some communities did, and you get 50 years out in your utility, and your utility's trash, cause you didn't
Right.
maintain it, and now all of a sudden the cost of replacement's crazy. And out here with these soils and these groundwater conditions, like open cut construction, it's probably not all that much fun. And you've got some pipes in some pretty sticky locations, state roads, easements, like that's expensive. You know, going to do work for the state, they're gonna make you do 18 inches of gravel and 7 inches of pavement, it's crazy, you could land like a 737 on some of these roads. But you don't wanna have to repave them, is my point, and if you can do rehab now without, it's like arthroscopic surgery, right, you can get in there without cutting,
Mhm.
that would be the way to do it. Maybe arthroscopic's not right, you guys get it, yeah.
Is there any way of getting around without replacing that clay pipe that we have, cause that's in the older part of our line? Down to the- So, yeah.
The ones that we thought were straight enough to do this pipe is basically the plastic pipe through and they cure it, steam or water, or
Okay,
UV nowadays. We recommended that, but the
Right.
ones that are disjointed, you end up going through and trying to line it, and then, I'm trying to think of like a good analogy at home, like you get a fold in that plastic or something, if there's a disjointed pipe, now you have like a flap on top of the disjoint, and it's even
Yeah,
more place for stuff, it's not worth it.
One of those you
I'd
show
rather
us.
have you not do it than use CIPP incorrectly, cause then you're just gonna open cut it a few years later and you waste it. But your ductile iron and your cast iron, over time, try to line those, because they are not gonna last. Your ductile pipe's not gonna last like 100 years like you would expect. You should get 100 years out of PVC to take care of it, right?
Mhm.
And then try to open your manholes every year. If you can do it, if you can figure out a way to get somebody in here to do it, just open them up, check them visual, take a picture for you. Make sure there's no backup. Look at the bricks. If you had like a really bad winter or something, have them carry some hydraulic cement with them and just parge the inside of that riser as best you can. So,
And the ones in the state roads probably take the biggest beating.
I bet they take a beating, and then you need like a detail and stuff to get out there too, so that's not fun.
I mean,
The lining of, the, iron or, with the exception of the clay pipe.
Yep.
There's a lot of root invasion that
Yep.
we've seen in joints. Now, how resistant is that lining, and is there an anticipated life extension, with these
And they
lines?
tell you get 100 years out of them.
Yeah, so the liners, for those who aren't familiar, the CIPB liners, first of all, there's no joints, right? From manhole to manhole, there's no joints in between, so there's no room for intrusion of water, roots, anything. The second is that it's fully structural on its own. So that pipe, that host pipe that it is within, that outside pipe could fully deteriorate and disappear.
becomes like its own PVC pipe.
Well,
It's its own
It
pipe
is,
within
it's
a pipe.
structurally independent.
Yeah.
My question stemmed from where all the invasion of roots and water, they're all at the joints, which
Yep.
are the weakest point, and of course, that doesn't change with the liner. Are you saying that the liners in present
No,
day
the roots are
time?
coming in for water. If they can't get the water, they won't come in. It's pretty linear. Most of those roots were at the clay. The casted didn't see a ton of places with roots coming in, maybe a couple. It was more just a concern that the joint's rotting out, right? It's the weak point. It's two pieces of metal next to each other with air and water. Like, that's
Well,
where it's
there's
gonna go.
There's one of those pictures in there that shows a
There
stream
is
of
one.
water.
There's some of them, yeah. In the clay ones for sure.
Where I saw most of it in your report was down in the lower end, which is the oldest.
For sure.
Oldest part of the system.
The upper end, the surprises were O&M, right? So you saw those manholes way up at the north end of the system where it takes the 90-degree bends before it gets to the highway.
Some of those are the ones that take the beating. I mean, people.
No, but like the flow path, there was a lot of like partial blockages in the pipe. 90-degree bends, it's like the same thing going on in our bodies. Like, you know, fluid tries to take a move at 90 degrees, that's where it's gonna get bound up. Like,
gonna
it just
slow down.
happens,
Yeah.
exactly.
A lot of, at least I suspect, a lot of the clay vinyl pipe is on a site that is not owned by the WPCA, but certainly discharges and is subject to a lot of infiltration.
Go get them, Tiger. You know, you own the system that they discharge to, so go make them fix them. My opinion, again, you know, that Putnam would do the same thing to you. If you guys, like, back when they thought you were causing the pump station problems, this 12, 13 years ago, remember? They wouldn't hesitate if they thought you were the problem. And if you have documentation showing what the problem are, you know, you can help them. You can help them with it. You can say, hey, these are the fixes. We can help you get somebody out here to do it. But you're gonna cut the check.
Right.
So that's right off the bat. You might take a bunch of II out of there now, so you're not paying for that tomorrow going to Putnam, and you didn't pay for it.
We're not collecting it now.
But you're paying for it going to Putnam.
Yeah.
That's the thing, and you know,
That's
you
what,
own what's coming into your pipes, whether you own the pipes at the edges of it or not.
that's what we see, you know, when there's
Yeah.
a lot of water rain.
Yeah.
We see the delivery to Putnam
Yeah.
much more.
Right, in the
Your
media.
changes in flows, remember, we went through this, they're not actually like that dramatic, like, you think to like some of the cities in Putnam themselves, like, you'd be like the best spot in their system probably. But again, we work for Woodridge Lake Sewer District up in Goshen, they only have like 800 customers, but it's around that huge lake, like, there's pipe all the way around it, you know? They have like 19 miles of pipe for 800 customers. So, death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Right.
Every little manhole bleeding in. If you guys wanna get bang for the buck, manhole rehab is your best bang for the buck. If you wanna protect the longevity of your system to avoid future replacement, CIPP of pipes while they're still in good shape, right? And the O&M, just do it. And after you're done with just doing the first list of O&M, just set a program. We're gonna do a third of our system every year on a recurring basis, a quarter of our system. I don't care what it is. Pick a number and then just hit it. And just every year, just go through and cycle through. Also, if you ever had like an insurance claim come up or something, like, you're meeting the standard of care. Like, you know, if you have two manholes that are paved over and they've been paved over for years and there's a backup in a house or something, it's not gonna look good for the town's insurance. That stuff happens. I've seen it happen.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you can prove that you had a program, hey, we jetted this thing like, you know, 3 months ago. Okay, you know, not your fault. Not the standard of care.
Yeah, and in, you know, in doing that, in setting aside so much per year for like manhole rehab and any other O&M things we wanna put in here, we can then project out, say if we wanna start this following fiscal year,
Yep.
because we've already set our budget for this upcoming fiscal year, then we can establish what the sewer use rate fee should be for that following year, and then decide this is how much you wanna set aside per year. And hopefully the user fee rates that we pay to Putnam, and we don't get a heck of a lot of rain, cause that's the other determining factor.
This year's probably not great right now, you know?
Right, we can't
Pretty
wait
wet.
to see the last quarter bill we're gonna get.
Yeah,
for the month of
nothing you
May.
can do.
No. But at least this way we can kind of project out what our sewer use rate's gonna be for customers.
Yeah, and well, I was gonna mention it when Justin was talking before. I don't know how good Putnam is at budget forecasting, but I would ask them to try to forecast out a few years too. Like, and not wait until like
For our benefit.
May that year to find out that your budget went up by 30% or something. You know, most entities are setting their budget early in the calendar year.
They tell us into the year what the rates are now gonna be, we're kinda stuck with it. So,
I live
yeah,
in
we
Long
can have
Meadow,
that
Mass. We're
conversation.
part of the Springfield system,
Yeah.
and sometimes they tell us after July first, and it's
Yeah,
like,
Yeah,
Same
we
here.
just had a town meeting, like,
Right.
you know, and that,
Same here.
so there's always a special town meeting in September,
Right.
you know, to try to fix it, but
Yeah.
encourage them to give you they know when capital's coming, and they know based on their sledge contracts that go out several years, what that's gonna look like, those are the big ones. Their labor's probably not gonna change a ton.
Right.
And power's power, it is what it is, you know,
Yeah, everybody's paying it.
right, right.
So, yeah. Anything else?
good. No, I think
So we have, we'll also have access to the electronic spreadsheet itself that we can modify as we go along into the future.
We do not normally share those sorts of things as instruments and service. If you're comfortable with just like a clean scrubbed spreadsheet, it's
Mhm.
just the data, raw data cells.
Yep.
No formulas or anything like that, I'm willing to do that.
Okay.
But I did that once a long time ago, and if you get into somebody, I know you have some spreadsheet experts in the group here. You get into somebody else's spreadsheet, you can
Well, yeah, that's.
turn things sideways pretty fast if you don't know how things
But
are
I'm,
linked.
I'm thinking along the lines of, if we have access to this, and we can print out sections of that document that we need, that we wanna focus on.
Yep.
We get access to the spreadsheet, and then we just print out those sections, we're gonna basically say, if we wanna prioritize, these are the things we wanna do, and everybody gets access to
Yeah,
it.
if you wanna score them differently, you can too.
And it's a read-only type of thing.
Yeah.
I'm fine with it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, it won't be read-only, you can do whatever you want with it, you can
Okay.
restore it. It'll just be, I call it a scrub spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's fine.
So there's like 6 of
That's
them,
even
right?
better.
It's the 3 for pipes and the
Sure.
3 for, manholes.
Manholes,
Yeah,
right.
okay, no problem.
Just save off the originals before we start editing.
I mean, the reality is nowadays, and my 20-year-old will figure out how to do it, you can take like a PDF and
Oh, yeah,
reconvert it to Excel if you want, but we'll send you the clean spreadsheet.
okay, that'd be great.
Yep.
Appreciate
I
that.
don't know if there was anything else in your email, Leanne, that,
Those are questions generated by the group.
Okay.
I'd love to take, feedback.
I think we hit most of them during the conversation.
We did.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
No problem, thanks for having us.
Thank
Here's
you.
your,
Any more questions from anybody for these folks?
Well, you wanna, anybody out here have a question for him?
I was just curious, how old is the original system, the oldest,
It's about 30 years old.
30? Okay.
No, it's gotta be more than that.
well, the clay stuff will be pre-1970 for sure.
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
gonna say,
that's the one that goes up to the Academy South.
right, that used to be Amherst College.
When it was Amherst College, they
Yeah.
brought it up that far.
Oh, interesting.
That was the determining factor of Woodstock ending up with a sewer system. And it was privately owned by Amherst College at the time. And then the town of Woodstock, took it over and extended it, expanded actually the system because of the direction it went by gravity, and added the industrial park to it, which was by gravity. And that's when I think the town took it over. And then when Amherst College, I guess, dissolved, property was sold to Data General, and I don't know who owned the system at that point. I know in the 1980s,
They
when the
paid for it.
industrial park came in, it was, then became part of the collection system.
Yeah.
owned
That
by
was like
Woodstock
an
going
industrial
public.
park to Woodstock.
Right, and that's how we were able to get the industrial park expanded the way it was to be able to put it on that sewer line. But that sewer line's probably ductile iron pipe going to Butts Road.
And that's
going
the
down
first
to,
part,
Putnam.
I worry about where it goes under the bridge on Butts Road. I think that's where a lot of those pictures, the clog lines and the old pipe.
Yep.
Is in, on the.
Some of it was cast and some was ductile. The way you can tell the difference is the cast is all tuberculated. The inside of it's like, it's just like the pipe's growing in on itself. The
Wow.
ductile usually doesn't do that, but the cast is pretty nasty looking stuff.
Question that, given these were all projections,
Oh, yeah.
and, depending, irregardless of what we do or we don't do. Now, would you offer a review of updating these, say, in 2027, so that would be a management tool for us to, and us some kind of idea what it would cost us
Yeah.
for that review.
And even like a sewer rate projection,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I'm thinking sewer rates tied right into anticipated maintenance and all that, and I'm sure it gets everybody's attention, the initial increase.
Yeah.
Where we perhaps missed the boat in this year, perhaps the previous year, and not adjusting those rates.
Where you guys have like the fixed fee rate structure, it's a little simpler. We have a lot of clients that have either pay by the dollars per 100 cubic foot or dollar per 1,000 gallons, or a hybrid system. Those are a little bit more complicated, but we usually do like a deeper recalibration every 5 years, and then just a static analysis in the years in between. So super rough numbers, like that every 5 years is probably in like the 7 to 10 grand range of what it costs. The annual kind of recheck is probably more like in the 3 to 5 grand range, realistically. We're happy to do it. I don't know if, how much help you need us, if your customer base hasn't changed, but we're happy to help it. It's a pretty linear, formula once you set your budget to look at the expense side. The only thing that we didn't have access to is if for some reason as costs go up, and for seniors as things become more unaffordable, if percent collection starts to change, like if the town's having to put liens out there on past dues or something, then obviously then you need to start factoring in the percent collection into your rate.
Like delinquent.
Yeah, delinquent. I don't like that term, but if you're
It's a real term.
if you're collecting 90% of your
Yeah.
revenue and your rate's 1,000, you got to take the 1,000 divided by 0.9.
Yeah.
To set your rate.
We get 10%, we get all.
Exactly. We're happy to help. With that said, if you don't need us, whatever's good for you.
Okay.
I think right now in a vacuum without consultants telling you what to do, you have the ammunition that you need
I think so.
to vet it yourselves, right? You just set your 26 budget. You guys have 6 months to figure out what you want to do before you start talking about 27. So, go for it. If you have questions along the way, call us, email us, whatever.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate everybody coming.
Real quick.
Thank you.
When will we get the updated sewer map that we can download to the GIS or upload to the GIS? Do we have that, will we have that?
Like an ArcGIS layer?
Yeah,
Can send that, yeah.
I think.
Is that what you use, ArcGIS?
yeah.
Okay.
We'll talk to our CAD guy, that's a different language.
I don't speak GIS. Do you have like a CAD, GIS person?
Not me, but I do, yeah, I'd have to speak to our HR person.
We'll
but
just
yeah.
send you
You can
the
get the file. for it,
ArcGIS
yeah.
files,
Yeah.
and you can give it to whoever does that, and if they have questions, we can get the 2 GIS nerds on the phone and.
Actually, it's the tax assessor's office,
Okay.
is in charge of doing that. They do it annually, and then, yeah, so, yeah.
I'm not gonna include the map with the layers of recommendations on it, just the static map, pipes, manholes,